How do you hire people?
You know, I don't think we've been careful enough about hiring people is one thing. And maybe it's just because it's very hard. Some of these big companies put people through a big interview process that lasts a week and many, many meetings, and then they still hire people who aren't good. So I don't know that that really fixes anything. Um, we've had a mixture. I mean, we've had some very good successes hiring people, um, like who are just very good, and you just couldn't imagine having anyone better in that position. And we have a couple such people at the company right now, and that's great. Um, and then, you know, uh, hopefully you land like that's more than you can really ask for when you get that. But mostly what you hope for is just people who are going to do a good job and care about working on the game and do a good job on the game and are productive and do great. And that's mostly what we have now.
Okay.
uh After because like I said, we had a little bit of a layoff, and when you have a layoff, you try to insulate, you try to make it's very hard. I hope nobody listening to this ever has to do this. um but you try to make the decisions that are going to make the company come out the best after the layoff, right? But you would have preferred to not have to do it in the first place.
Yeah.
um but uh yeah, I mean, we've also, so that's great that we have good people. But we've also had to fire people, right? Or there have been a number of times when somebody's obviously not doing well, you do a thing where you communicate clearly with them and say, look, we don't think you're doing that well. We need to put you on some kind of performance improvement thing or have higher expectations. And very often when people have options, they will quit shortly into that process because of whatever reason. Because maybe if the problem is they're only working at home for 1 hour a day because it's a remote thing, maybe they don't want to work more than 1 hour a day and they figure they can do that at some other company, right? Maybe they're actually working 3 jobs and aren't telling you, and that's why they're only working 1 hour a day, right? This is one of the hard things about the remote scenario, is because I can't really see what's happening because we don't install any of this invasive spyware on people's machines or whatever. I don't ever want to do that. Although who knows, at some point it may become financially infeasible to run a company without doing that, but we don't do it. So if someone, if it looks to me like someone's working for an hour a day, I kind of have to believe that that's actually what's happening. Like, because otherwise, like someone who is legitimately, like, let's just say there's some bad actor who is legitimately exploiting you and knows that, right? If you say, look, you're just not that productive, can we work to get that up? I mean, they're just going to say, oh yeah, sorry, the code base is complicated, I have trouble understanding it. Or they're going to start blaming you. They're going to be like, oh, this code sucks and it should be higher quality, whatever, right? They're not going to say, oh yeah, I'm only working an hour a day because I'm also working these 2 other jobs, right? And so it's an inherently low trust environment, and I don't like that. But we've definitely had cases where there were people legit only working an hour a day, and we just had to deal with that by straight up firing them. Or, I mean, we've had cases of some people who would do like an hour every 2 weeks, and because I wasn't directly, I don't know, we were just giving them a lot of chances to improve. Like during COVID especially, it was an unhappy time, and people have enough difficulties in their lives and stuff, and you try to just be very lenient. But you also, the company will go out of business if people don't program,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So you just eventually you need to put your foot down and say, like, dude, We need you to do stuff. And so we've had to shorten all of this. We've had a bunch of that as well. Like, I'm not even, if anyone is out there thinking I'm talking about them, I'm thinking of at least 4 different people right now, right? Like, that's how many times this has happened. So hiring is hard is just, what I'm trying to say.
Do you see any correlation between like the stuff people say or do during the interview and then performing nicely afterwards?
I think there is. I think when you get someone who's really at the high end and they're programming because they really legitimately enjoy programming and they have a lot of good experience and they and they've done significant things before. You can tell that in the interview questions. So you can start talking to them and you can get really into details about what they did. And they'll have interesting answers and they'll be able to tell you the details. This is okay. So one of the things that happens at bigger companies is you'll have a team of several programmers who worked on some feature or system. And in reality, like 1 or 2 of those people carried most of the weight and then the rest of them were just sort of hanging on, right? And how do you tell the difference? Because on the resume, those people's titles and job descriptions look the same, right? How do you know? And the way that you know is you just start talking. If you're technically literate, you can't do this if you're not technically literate, but you just start talking to them like, oh, you wrote the collision detection system for this game engine. Like, what kind of primitives were you colliding with? Oh, okay. So did you do an early out check where you check a looser bounding, like a big sphere with multiple things inside, right? What did that look like? And then how did you prevent the overhead of that from being too large? And what did you have any cache coherency problems? And how did you get around that? Did you like reorient the way the data structure was stored? You can just go further and further, and you don't ask a preset list of questions. That's the thing, because that won't work. You have to dynamically tailor it to what they're talking about, and you have to have enough of a clue about what they're talking about to ask good questions and then to understand if the answer is good, right? And so that's really the art of the interview. So there's a video on YouTube that I always thought was pretty good that illustrates this. It's Casey Muratori doing an interview with Sean McGrath. It's not a real interview. It's like a mock interview, but it's really long. It's like 90 minutes. And it's just him asking Sean about what he has done. And I think that's a very good example of how to interview a technical person. Now, I also interview like artists and stuff, right? 3D artists, modelers and stuff. And I don't have as deep of domain knowledge there. I've been in games a long time, and so I can ask some decent questions there, but I'm not going to be able to ask questions that are as good as the ones that I'm able to ask about programming. And that's just a limitation there. I have to trust when we hire someone onto the art team, I have to trust to some degree that the other people on the art team have vetted that person in a reasonable way. But okay, so apart from that telling you technical ability, asking these questions, it also does tell you about motivation to a reasonable degree, because you can hear in someone's voice, how are they talking about these things? Are they interested? Are they proud of this solution that they had, right? Or are they just like burned out and trying to get through the interview and like don't really ever want to program again in their life? Like, you can tell these things and that helps. But even so, it's just hard. Like, I mean, to be fair, a lot of the times when we've had these severe problems with like people just not really doing anything, it was where we had a shorter interview process where we were being less. So we would do a little bit of this question and answer like I was talking about, but I never would like super grill people. But I'm going to switch to doing the 90-minute version. And that's why I say we need to interview better, because I do think, like, again, there's this like wanting to be nice to people and wanting to assume like, oh, you worked at some big game company like Electronic Arts or Epic for 5 years. surely you did a good job and were exposed to all the knowledge around games and all that. And then you ask some cursory questions and they have pretty good answers and or okay at least answers, and I don't go into that much detail because I don't know that much about how that system worked or whatever, and then that person just ends up bad. So it's hard. It's hard, but I would encourage people to watch that YouTube video and use that method, because I'm going to go more and more in that direction. I don't think you want to sit there and quiz people with like LEET code questions or whatever, because that doesn't really tell you if they're actually good. Although I do think there's a place for one or two of those, maybe to start things out, or more often you can organically integrate those into the question and answer process. So for example, when I was talking about the collision detection question, you could be like, oh, did you use a tree structure for that? Or did you use like a grid? And if they give you the answer, like, oh, we used a tree structure, I would say, why didn't you use a grid? Did nobody think about it? Was there a reason you wanted to use the tree? Is there some property of it, right? And you're starting to get to this deep knowledge around trees, and not just like, did this person memorize how to do the breadth first search, right? Like there was this thing going around Twitter the past week about like, here's the programming question that I ask, and if someone can't answer this, it's a no hire. And it's like a very simple binary tree. And it's like, print out each horizontal level of the tree on one line, right? And it's very easy, even if you have never encountered the problem before, if you understand trees, you should be able to answer this in like 30 seconds, unless you're totally flustered, right? And there's a couple different ways to do it even, which is the silly thing. But you know, everybody got enraged about it. Like, what do you mean? I write all this software, I don't know anything about trees. And it's like, oh man, that's just where we have this every 5 years or something. There's a big flare up about people being pissed off that they program all kinds of JavaScript and don't know anything about data structures, right?
Yeah.
But those kind of questions are very artificial, but you can get to them very naturally if you're conversant in the subject matter to begin with.